had this period in my career where I won pretty much every contest. And it went to a point where my dad kind of stopped saying nice work. And instead it was like, okay, what can we do so that you do a better job next time? So it didn't matter that I had won, like in comparison, I won, by points ahead of the other. It wasn't just like a small margin. It didn't really matter. You would skip the congratulations and go straight to the, what can we do to make this better?
Those who are living a life of freedom have optimized themselves and their lives in pursuit of one thing: choice. They've created the financial, geographical, and time freedom to do what they want when they want to. But they've also created freedom from their internal limitations, their story, their biology, and their character. In this podcast, The Freedom Project, it is my attempt to shortcut your learning curve to having total freedom in your life so you can go and do more cool shit. I'm going to bring you deep dives into some of the most inspiring adventure athletes and business owners in the world. I'm also going to give you the key concepts of my coaching process to adventurepreneurs so you can start applying that to your life today. So here is another episode of The Freedom Project. At some point in life, you're going to have to drop the identity you've built and change who you are. Sometimes this comes at the end of a challenging career when you've realized you're just not going to make it. And other times, this is when you're going to do incredibly exciting and daunting things. For example, when you're moving on to another stage in life. When Jackie Paaso decided to give up on her mogul skiing Olympic dream, she encountered the first identity shift. It sparked this incredibly difficult time for her. But the lessons she learned in that time ultimately made her one of the world's greatest pro skiers. Jackie dominated many events of the freeride world tour and set the bar for the type of skiing that was possible. She built a career that many dream of, but few achieve. Once more, her identity was built to support this life. But when Jackie and her husband got pregnant, once more a shift of identity was imminent. Jackie found herself asking questions around how her life would look post-baby and what would happen to her career and also her way of life. Alongside Elise Saugstad, Jackie featured in Here, Hold My Kid, a ski movie sharing this journey as they shred big mountains whilst being new mothers. Alongside the details of Here, Hold My Kid, we discuss dealing with mental health and how to approach challenges you face, navigating the uncertainty of identity shifts, what kind of example Jackie intends to be for her kids, what Jackie wishes she could have known when going through her initial identity shift, and her process of skiing big lines. Now, these identity shifts, they're kind of this death and rebirth cycle that so many of us have been through. I'm sure if you think back to your life, there'll be multiple times when you've been through a death and rebirth cycle where the old version of you has to die and hopefully, like a phoenix from the ashes, you rise. Now, I see these the whole time with working with my clients, and in fact I'm working with someone right now who's letting that old version of herself die and in the process of rising from the ashes and redeveloping and reimagining herself and really becoming a more authentic, genuine version of her. It doesn't make it any less painful even if you know what's happening, but I do think it helps you navigate and accept reality. So in this episode with Jackie, I think it's useful. Well, I found it useful. I'm obviously unlikely to become a mother in the future, but there's a chance of becoming a father, and there's an identity shift that may happen in there. And this episode with Jackie has been very helpful with this conversation in helping me accept parts of those changes and also open myself up to things that I may not have anticipated. So here is Jackie Paaso. Jackie, welcome to the show. I'm so stoked to be speaking to you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me here. I'm happy to be on the show today.
My absolute pleasure. So in doing a little bit of research for today, I was scrolling through your Instagram and I saw, I think I've got it up now actually, which is your was it your first attempt at skiing? And what I can see is a version of you with a kind of smashed up face. Is it like a swollen eye? Talk to me about that.
Yeah, so it wasn't my first attempt, I believe. I think I was about 6 or 7 at the time. So I started skiing when I was 4, but I was living in Massachusetts, and I had one of my cousins was also living with us at the time, and they was winter. There was a sledding hill, and they had built a jump. And they were sledding. They're just hitting like normal. And I thought, actually, I honestly don't know who was behind it. I don't know if my cousin was like, "Hey, let's send you off this jump." But I agreed, and I thought I was gonna do this and it was gonna go awesome. What happened was I ended up sliding down the backside of the jump on my face.
Oh,
So
impressive.
I'm sure my cousin, who I think he was like 12 years older than me, was probably slightly terrified going back to my parents, with my entire cheek all cut up and swollen and everything. But I don't remember it being like a scarring. Like I was like, I'm never doing that again. I think well, maybe not the sliding down the face part, but thought everything else was fun. So my first time
I was about to
jumping.
say, you look stoked in
Yeah.
that photo. You're like, yeah, I did something cool.
Yeah, it was just the first of many bumps and bruises and cuts and scrapes.
So how did you become the type of kid who falls down the backside of a jump on the face and goes, I want to do some more of that? Like, what were your influences to make you that type of person?
I'm pretty sure it had a lot to do with my father. He was a professional American football player for a brief moment, and he was always coaching a ton of athletes. So when I was young, growing up, I don't know how familiar you are with the NFL, but we were living in Foxborough at a period in our life, and that's where the New England Patriots trained and play. And so my dad used to go to their practices and kind of help train them, like the more unofficial ones. This is 30 plus years ago. And not only would he train them, but he would train with them. So his nickname in the NFL was like Dr. Death and Leg Breaker, because he would like just absolutely destroy these 20-something-year-old guys at the height of their fitness, and he's like in his 40s, and you just get out there and train with them. So I'm pretty sure my like love of sports and anything like that comes mostly from him, I'd have to say.
What kind of stuff did he teach you? Like, were there any explicit lessons like this is how to be, or is it more implicit?
He was always saying like kind of I don't know the base. I don't know if people say it nowadays, but like, speed is your friend. He never really made a difference, because I had a brother that was like 2 years younger. He never really made a difference between the fact that I was a boy. I was a girl and he was a boy back then. It was just like, okay, we're doing these sports, we're doing them together. And doesn't really matter. Which people nowadays might be saying like, oh, it's a bit silly, but back 30 years ago, that was a thing. I remember being at one of the football practices, when I was at that age where all the boys could join like Pee Wee Football League, thinking like, oh, this is like, I want to do this. And I remember one of the coaches at the time saying like, oh, it's too, your brother will be able to play soon, because he was 2 years younger, but like, no, like nothing about me being able to play. But that was really nothing that like, my father was just like, yeah, we're all in. We're going to do this. You fall down, you get back up again. To the point where it's a little bit extreme sometimes, especially if you're not so much of a sports family. I'm sure some parents must have been like, oh my God, this guy is kind of crazy. But sometimes it was too much. But I think it kind of made me the person I am today. And it really didn't bother me that much, because I just always like, I love sports and wanted to be as good as I possibly could be at them. So I kind of liked having my dad behind me, pushing me a bit.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? You can kind of, I hear this the whole time. So I used to work with a lot of professional athletes in the CrossFit realm, and these guys were elite performers in every sense of the way. They usually had some sort of parental figure who like pushed and pushed and pushed, but in a way that they deem as positive, but the outside world might go, actually, that's like not the way I'd see it. But like, were there any situations where you're like, okay, I don't think this is positive at the time, but you look back at it and go, oh, that shapes me in a really beneficial way?
Um, oh, I, I think the one in it, and I'm still up for debate, and you'd almost have to ask my husband about this, is that when I used to ski moguls back in the day, and especially in like the regional level, I had this period in my career where I won pretty much every contest. And it went to a point where my dad kind of stopped saying nice work, and instead it was like, okay, what can we do so that you do a better job next time? So it didn't matter that I had won, like in comparison, I won, by points ahead of the other. It wasn't just like a small margin. It didn't really matter. He would skip the congratulations and go straight to the, what can we do to make this better? And I think in one sense it's good because it made me always want to improve and work on getting better so I could get to the next level. But at the other hand, it also never made me satisfied with my performance. So it's like, even with some victories that I've had, I could pull them apart and not entirely be satisfied, because I was always looking at what could I do to be better. So I'm kind of torn with that, because I think that it's what it requires to kind of, for some people at least, to get to the next level. But at the same time, it can be pretty tough. It's not necessarily the healthiest way to go about things, to never feel fully satisfied with your performance or where you're at. So it's I don't know if it's good looking back.
It's a very useful question. Like, what could we do better? It's just, I suppose it's what it's surrounded in as well. And it's like, I almost guarantee that everyone in every situation is doing the best they possibly can. So I know that wouldn't have come from a malicious place or a place of like, how can we instill a deep fear of not being good enough into Jackie from a young age? It's more like, how can we make her be her best? But it's an interesting question and useful. How did that like translate to your performance and to that winning streak that you had?
I mean, that winning streak, for example, I was, I think, my mid-teens. So I have to try and think back to exactly how it was. I think it was one of those things that, it was disappointing for a moment, because you always want, at least your parents to say like, congratulations, nice work. But at the same time, it's not like I didn't have that kind of, I knew it was his way of showing his support. And then my mother was just like, no matter what I did, it was always great and amazing. So I had both sides of it, which I think that helped. If I had both of my parents coming down on me being like, all right, that was all right. Like what's up next? I think that would have been really difficult. So to have kind of like good cop, bad cop type of parenting in some sense, it was okay. And how it helped. I mean, yeah, I suppose I kept pushing and wanting to improve. And I think you have to have that kind of full focus all the time. You can't just sit and be comfortable. If you want to get to the next level, you have to kind of always be consistent, like constantly pushing yourself. Otherwise there's always somebody that's going to be working harder and get past you or, get there first. So
how did you see yourself at that time? Like, what was your identity in terms of the way you viewed yourself?
I saw myself as a skier, probably, mostly a mogul skier. That was like, I was an athlete. That's what I did. I was, okay in academics, but especially as I got older, my focus was more into sports and everything. So it was my whole life, my whole identity, it felt like at the time. yeah, it was a big part of me.
Okay. And then there's a point where you go, actually, mogul skiing isn't the ultimate path. What happened in leading you up to that point?
So I had injury, nothing like, not a major, like I didn't have a knee surgery or anything like that. Knock on wood.
Is that still?
Yes, I've had knee injuries, but not like,
yeah, really impressive.
Especially being a mogul skier for so long.
Yeah.
All my knee injuries came in freeride, but still managed to, get through them fairly. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I had minor injuries, but I think the bigger problem was just like the passion for the sport was kind of fading, and it was hard. It was hard for my parents to kind of support. Like, they did everything they could, but skiing, especially in the States, is a fairly wealthy sport, and it requires a lot of money. And my parents like did as much as they could, but as I got older, especially, it was hard for me to ignore how much they were struggling. So it was hard for me to be like, okay, I'm going to keep pushing forward. And especially once I started having doubts, it wasn't like, it's not a big deal. Like, this money is not a big deal for them. I'll see how far it goes. It's kind of like, all right, well, I really need to decide if this is worth it. And if I have the heart, because without the heart, it's just I'm not going to get to where I want to go. So yeah, it was something that I decided after like maybe a couple seasons of struggling and not really having the passion that, like, all right, this isn't working. I need to call it quits. But
that's a tough thing to do, easy. Though. Like, yeah, how old are you at that point? And like, yeah, actually, how old are you at that point?
21, 22, something like that. So it was, more than half my life I had spent at that point mogul skiing, competing, and with dreams of, going to the Olympics and, having all these goals. And not really thinking about anything else besides skiing. So it was for me, it was pretty devastating. And yeah, it led to some pretty difficult years.
Yeah. And do you reckon, like, why do you think that was so difficult for you? I don't know. I think it was difficult for a couple of reasons. I think one, I felt like a bit of a failure for having just stopped doing this, chasing this dream that I had tried for so many years to pursue, especially knowing that it was quite the investment for my family. And then also personally, it meant a lot to try and achieve my dreams, and then to feel like, okay, well, it's not happening anymore. It's hard to admit defeat or failure. And it's not like I had anything else planned. So I had no idea where I was going to go. I didn't know what my next dreams or plans or I just was totally lost. So it was a hard spot to be in. Yeah, I can really imagine there's that feeling of, I'm this type of person, this is what I'm doing, I've got a very clear path in front of me, and then to change that is a very, very tough thing. How do you view that now, actually? Like, if you look back at that decision, like, what's your opinion of it from today's eyes?
I think from today's eyes, I wouldn't have been as stressed. I would have been able to see, like, I have so much more of my life ahead of me. It's not the end of the world, and other doors are going to open. It's easy said now when I kind of have a better grasp on how the world, better perspective and idea of how the whole world works. Right then, and I probably could have had somebody saying that to me, and I wouldn't have believed them just yet. But yeah, I definitely wish that I hadn't kind of what felt like wasted a couple of years in this like darkness, kind of just being like, it's done, that's it. there's nothing left. My whole identity is done. If the older me could have gotten through to my younger self at the time, I would have realized like, oh, it's okay. It's not the end of the world. This happens to a lot of people. You're going to end up somewhere you wouldn't have imagined, but that's not necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah. In the or at what point did you decide to move to, was it Lake Tahoe?
Yeah. It was maybe 4 or so years after I started, okay. 4 or 5 years after I started stopped mogul skiing.
Okay, so what happened in that interim time?
I tried moving out to Utah for a bit, and yeah, it didn't really work. And I was I was kind of back and forth a bit between Utah, East Coast, went on a Knowles experience, like thought I wanted to be a mountaineer. And then ended up like pretty depressed for some years. So I was working, I was getting by, I was taking care of myself, but wasn't really moving forward. I was just kind of trying to like get by at that point, I'd say. So kind of this weird transition period where I didn't really have any goals. I wasn't in college. I wasn't pursuing any dreams. I was just kind of getting through the days.
Yeah, that's and I'll share a bit of my story. I know it's not about me here, but it's kind of a useful corollary. So I was in the military for 4 years or so, and I was like, actually, this isn't working for me as a human being, for the drives that it's taking for me, and also like my progression as a human being. And that process of finishing that and then going, what the hell do I do now? That is it's just in the unknown. Like, how do I navigate this? How do I find something to grasp to? And especially, I'm sure it's in mogul skiing, it must be, okay, I've got the idea of the Olympics ahead of me, or I've got this goal and it's very clear and there's a pathway to get there. In the military, it's the same. I've got these ranks to climb. I've got these objectives to complete. And then you're kind of thrust into the unknown. And for someone who's so goal driven of like, this is what I achieve next, that's very difficult to negotiate. Is there anything that you learned from that time that you use now?
I think the biggest thing that I learned is that it's okay to seek help. It's okay to like admit that, like, okay, I'm not in the best position mentally, and I need some assistance to kind of get out of this hole that I've dug myself into. And that it is okay to not always have a goal, to kind of just like take some time to like just take it all in and maybe make a plan after you've kind of like had a chance to adjust and everything. Because yeah, if you are that kind of person that's always goal driven, when that goal, like when you fail at it or it disappears, whatever happens, it can be kind of hard. Like, okay, where do I go now? Because I don't think it's like, for me, it wasn't like, yeah, you have like your daily goals. Like I want to maybe go out and train and stuff like that. But it was important to have like this big goal to work for. Like not just like, I want to make sure I pay rent at the end of the month or stuff like it. I needed something that was more challenging and interesting to me to kind of feel like I was really living life. But sometimes you need a break, and sometimes you just need to reevaluate, and sometimes you need help. And I think that's totally okay. But at the time when I was in my 20s, I thought, I'm a failure. No one's going to understand. No one, like, and that's not the case. Everyone has their own struggles. Even if they don't want to admit it, I think everyone's kind of dealing with something. And you'd be surprised once you start opening up and talking what other people are experiencing, and that you're not necessarily alone. But at the same time, it's great to have supportive friends and family. But I think like depending on how much you're struggling, I think professional help is really important because everyone else is struggling, they only have so much energy that they can give you to help you. And it's best to like go and seek somebody that knows a little bit more, is study this. But at the same time, it might not be the first person you go to. You kind of have to shop around when it comes to getting help. And I think that's also important because when I first started getting help, seeking help, and getting to that point, I remember the first doctor that I spoke to was like, oh God, I think he's just going to make me worse. Really? It's possible. He just didn't understand my lifestyle or anything like that. So I think it's really important to find the right person. And that might take a couple.
Yeah. Is that because you weren't following like the traditional career path?
Definitely.
Like I'm sure that your doctor had followed until that point of like, okay, progress through college, do these qualifications, become a doctor. And you had something a bit different.
Yes, okay. Definitely. 100%. That was like, he was like, how are you going to pay your taxes? How are you, he was so concerned with the things are obviously, yes, they're important, but it wasn't an issue. Like it just wasn't that wasn't the important thing at the moment. That wasn't the problem. And I think he wasn't in a ski town. And when I went back to like where to Tahoe, for example, it was easier for me to find somebody that like understood what like with somebody in my situation, my lifestyle and everything like that. It was easier for them to relate and to kind of, okay, this is where I'm coming from, as opposed to if I were perhaps in a city, I would probably run into a lot of psychologists, be like, what are you doing with your life? Like, I don't understand this. So, you have to find somebody that kind of understands where you're coming from, and where you would like to be too.
Mm. And that's very difficult if you don't have that overarching vision of this is what I want to like do with like my life is kind of like here's the bigger goal that all the smaller goals are comprised of, because it's so disorientating. You're trying to find that path for yourself at the same time.
Yeah, it's tricky because your head's not really clear. You're not fully focused. You might have a whole bunch of ideas, and it's hard. Like when you're somebody like myself, I went from having one goal, and then I went from having a massive amount of goals, and I couldn't really narrow it down. I'd say that's kind of still the problem these days, is that there's so many things that are interesting. And I think that's also the exciting thing about life, is there are so many things out there, and it's impossible to do everything. And it's impossible to know exactly what you're going to take interest in. But if you don't know, maybe just try a whole bunch of things until something clicks. Because
is that what happened for you? Did you try a bunch of things, or was it like how did you? Because I'm guessing there's a point where you go, oh, this is the direction that I actually want to go, and this is the greater purpose. And that might have been Freeride World Tour, or it could have been something kind of more. Like, how did you get to a point where you had that more comprehensive vision?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, I wouldn't say I like went so far outside the box because I'm still skiing. I just changed types of skiing. So I had that period where I thought I wanted to be a mountaineer. At the time, coming from the East Coast, wasn't really familiar with ski mountaineering. So I just wanted to be a mountaineer, I thought. I did a bit of like park freestyle skiing, because especially coming from the East Coast, that was the more natural progression if I wasn't going to be a mogul skier. But then when I moved out to Tahoe, I kind of was introduced to big mountain skiing, and I had some friends that were like, "Oh, you should try a competition." And I think once I signed up for my first competition, and had a bit of success, considering it was my first competition, I qualified into the finals and everything. I was like, "Oh, okay, this is maybe what I've been looking for." And I was skiing. I was challenging myself, but I wasn't like in a park just on the same run, which was similar to mogul skiing, where you just pretty much do the same thing at a different location. But with big mountain skiing, I was like, oh, every mountain is so different. New areas, it can go into backcountry. It was kind of like mountaineering, but even more exciting, from my opinion, as a skier. So it took some time, but I'd say after a few freeride competitions, I was like, okay, I think I like this. I seem to have potential within this, and I'm going to see how far this goes. Which, if you had asked me 10 years earlier, I would have had no idea. So that's kind of fun.
So I've got this idea that I speak to my clients about quite a lot, which is, are you pursuing what's kind of ticking the boxes in terms of this pays the rent, this achieves these goals that are kind of very marked and clear ahead of me, or are you pursuing what's meaningful? And there's like a sense of, go on, sorry.
Oh, sorry. Definitely what's meaningful. All the other boxes, I figured them out, but it was a bit of a hustle. And for me, it was more, it's like finding what drives me, what gives me passion and kind of like meaning. And then I'll just figure out how I pay the bills. If that meant at the time having 3-4 different jobs and trying to also manage to get the time off, to be able to do the sports that I wanted to do. That's what it took. But it was some sacrifice, and, but I made it work.
What was it about the feeling of big mountain skiing that was different to park skiing or mogul skiing? Like, I'm talking about the actual kind of like, I'm on my skis. I know for me there's a different feeling, but like, what's that like for you?
I think it's just like a little bit of the unknown. It's like mogul skiing, especially nowadays, like the courses, it's an Olympic sport. So the courses are, I don't know how long they are anymore, but they're so long. The jumps are this, like everything is so regulated and structured, and it's a lot of the same. Yeah, the snow conditions might be slightly different, but for the most part, it's the same thing, just in a different location. And park skiing, it was a lot similar to that. What I missed was kind of getting out and exploring, hiking up the mountain, seeing new areas. And it was a bit more like a puzzle piece, because you didn't have like a set route, which of course was like park skiing. Yeah. Okay. You can be a bit more creative, and maybe take a different feature over the other one. Whereas in mogul skiing, it's like there's the left lane, center lane, right, because for whatever reason, one feels better to you. But they're pretty much the same thing. But with freeride, it's like you have this whole face, and you can go wherever looks the most inviting to you. And that can be totally different from one competitor to another. And I think that's kind of interesting to me, because I could go, it's like, this is where I feel this looks like fun. This looks like a challenge. I think I might score well. So I'm going to go here. I'm going to see how it goes. And it's a lot of like, especially when you get onto the freeride tour, like you don't know 100% until you're in it, because it's visual inspection, and that's just also another challenge. And I also, if you were to compare freeride to like park skiing, for example, I feel like there's more, you have to be a good skier. Like park, they're amazing in the air, tricks and stuff like that. But for me, is really like the actual skiing, that I missed a bit. Like that was important to me to be able to get out and just kind of challenge my abilities.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You mentioned there the concept of planning your run as well. And that's something that I massively struggle with. If I'm looking at a face, I'm just like, I will have a view of how it's going to look when I'm there. And it's just always completely different. And like, what have you learned, like in a purely tactical level? Like, how have you learned to get better at that?
I mean, it definitely, like, experience is probably the one thing that you can't learn overnight. It takes time. You have to experience so many different situations, so many different mountains, terrain, to just really have a good grasp of what's going on. And it changes. Like, I was talking about this the other day with a few former competitor friends of mine, the difference between competition and filming. And especially if you're filming in a helicopter, you don't have massive amounts of time to scope your line. You have time is money, and the minutes are ticking away, and you have to be able to kind of look at something as quickly as possible and take a couple photos maybe, and just you get dropped off at the top and figure out where you are. And hopefully you have enough experience to like really be able to find your line. Whereas competition, if the timing is as normal, you have at least a full day to kind of like sit, scope, and figure out where you want to go. I think what I've found the most, and what I usually tell people that are like starting visual inspection for the most time, it's like, try not to make it overly complicated in the beginning. Pick something that you know you can ski with confidence, that you have like easy markers to kind of find your way down the mountain. And then as you develop your skills, then maybe try and, take it up a notch, if that's what your type of skiing entails. But otherwise, like, just kind of like, especially with competitions, like the more fast and fluid you can get through an area, the better. And if you're like kind of like constantly checking and looking where you're supposed to be going because you try to pick off a really difficult, tricky line to navigate, then it's probably not going to score well. And it's the same with filming. Like if you're kind of just billy goating your way down something, it's not going to look as great. So keep it simple in the beginning. And then as you get the experience, you can start, challenging yourself a bit more.
If you love the podcast and you want to take in all the information in an easier to digest format, or you just prefer reading, then head to my website, tomfoxley.me, and click on the blog link. Here you'll find these podcasts in an easy to digest format, as well as descriptions and links that I may suggest in the show. Once more, that's tomfoxley.me. How did your dad's approach of this is what you can do better, or how can you improve, how did that translate to freeride?
I think instead of him, because he doesn't, when I started freeride, he was starting to get quite old. He doesn't fully understand. He never fully understood the sport or anything like that. But I think I'd say the biggest way probably is I've had victories in the sport, and there's definitely some victories that are more meaningful than others than me. Some were merely just, I got on top of the points and I wasn't necessarily happy with my performance. And I think that's like a bit of my dad's, how can you do better, kind of coming through myself as an individual. Like I always am analyzing and thinking like, okay, how can I do better? This could have been a lot smoother. This could have been faster. It is great in some senses, and it's also extremely annoying to never be 100% satisfied with what you do. But for me as a competitive athlete, that's my biggest critic.
Yeah,
for sure.
It's such a blessing and a curse in the same hand of having I've got to be better. A fear of insufficiency like drives us, but it's also a horrible thing to live with. And it's, I think you've almost got to take it as like, okay, this is the benefits within it. It's a tough thing to do, an easy thing to say.
Yeah, definitely. Couldn't agree more.
When was the decision to Actually, before we get there, what runs stand out from the Freeride World Tour?
I'd say probably my first victory, which would have been the tram face at what's now called Palisades back in 2010. I would say, like, kind of the background behind that was this was back before there was a qualifying tour in North America. So you got in, if you're a North American athlete, you got in by wildcard. And I had received 2 wildcards to the first 2 events, or somewhere like one in Chamonix and one in Austria. And it wasn't, I didn't have any like impressive results or anything like that. I think I was somewhere like 5th in the rankings. So not at the very bottom, but wasn't enough to get a wild card to the tram face event, even though it's my home mountain at the time. So I was there with all the competitors and stuff and the organization, and a couple of my friends that are a little pushier than I am were insisting that I ask for a wild card, even though it's like against everything I feel comfortable about. But fortunately for them, they were like, no, you got to do this. And they were also kind of like vouching for me. I had, at the time we didn't have lodging at that location. So I had taken in a bunch of the athletes were staying with me, and they're like, yeah, just pushing. So the day before the competition, at the very last minute, I was awarded a wild card, but no one really knew it. So I remember the next morning I'm going and I'm kind of scouting at the bottom, and some of my friends were like, oh, you'll get it next time, Jackie. I'm like, no, I'm going to the top. I get to go. So I remember I was expecting, I'm like, all right, women are going to go last. Everything's going to be bombed out. It's going to be, it's not going to be the greatest conditions. How am I going to do this? And one of my team managers at the time was like, oh, just, go here, go from the top, and you should hopefully avoid the bomb hole because this is where all the guys are going to go. And yeah, see how it goes. So I went, I did it. Went from higher up, didn't quite avoid the bomb hole, had probably the world's largest bounce afterwards, and somehow managed to land on my feet and ski away. And I remember Nicholas Halewood's the organizer kind of telling me afterwards, he's like, that was a good wild card. So I had redeemed myself, made it to Verbier with the golden bib. Of course I crashed because I tried to do some big cliff there and didn't really understand like what winning the world title meant at the time. I was just like, oh, let's see what I can do. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think that was like kind of what put me more so on the map for freeride, at least in the Freeride World Tour.
Those runs where you find that point of like, you nail it, where you feel very satisfied with how you perform. How does that feel?
It feels, I could tear that run apart too and find things that I could do better with it. But I think what I like most about some of those runs is where I pick something that's a little bit more challenging. Maybe no other woman has done it before. I think at that point, like none of the guys had taken off from that level. Something that we're like, okay, there's a little bit of a question mark here, but I think I can do it. Those runs are the most satisfying for me, as opposed to the runs that I've had on the tour where it's like, all right, well, you're kind of at the end of you're kind of right on the line for the cut. Let's just ski fast and pick something that maybe not as challenging, but I know that I'm going to land on my feet and make it to the finish line and probably end up in the top spot. It's nice that it works that way. But it's not nearly as satisfying as where I'm like, this is going to be a challenge. Let's see if it works. And then also knowing that, cause I've had times where I like picked off something big, and for whatever reason, I chickened out, or maybe the conditions weren't right. So when I actually do manage to like follow through with it, and then especially like ski away from it, that's a pretty good feeling.
Yeah, I can imagine. To take a bit of an aggressive left turn in this, how do you approach this as a career? Like, what's that like in terms of, I'm going to make sure I'm getting the relevant income. I'm going to make sure that I'm like doing all those things that annoying psychologist was mentioning about paying taxes and all that kind of stuff. Like, how do you meld those two worlds?
I've been pretty fortunate that, like, I've been in the sport for over a decade now, and I've just kind of like worked my way up. I've had good partnerships with my sponsors. I've kind of like proven that I'm here to deliver, whether it's results or content. I guess you could say I've paid my dues. I wouldn't say I'm making boatloads of money, but this is my job. This is my full-time job. And it took some time to get here. I don't know how long I'll stay here because it doesn't have the best retirement plan, but at the moment it's working. And it took a lot of sacrifices to get to this point.
Yeah. Pursuing what's meaningful, right?
Yes, okay. Definitely.
Nice. So how long has this been your kind of full-time gig?
Maybe since like 2012, 2013.
Okay. So pretty much 10 years.
Yeah.
Okay, sweet. And how's your identity shifted in that time? Like, how do you view yourself now compared to 2012, 2013?
Well, I've retired from competition as of, I suppose this will be I'm going into my 4th season away from competition. So now it's been, I don't know, it's changed a lot. I retired from competition. I made one movie about more like an expedition. And also within that time, after completing that expedition, became a mom soon after, and still making movies. And I'd say I'm kind of in another transition, kind of trying to figure out what life as a professional skier and a mother looks like, which is a fairly, like, there's only a few of us out there doing it. So a lot of us don't really know what it looks like, but we're kind of trying to figure it out as we go. So I think, yeah.
Yeah, you're breaking trail. Like, you are putting those first steps in.
I wouldn't say I'm the first, but the boot pack's not that set.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. You're somewhere in that group. Okay.
Yeah.
That's tough. Is it as disorientating, that identity shift, compared to what we spoke about to begin with, of like, I'm no longer doing like mogul skiing, I'm pursuing something different. Is it that level of disorientation, or is it something different?
It's a whole nother level, because it's like you go from being, as a professional athlete, I'd say it's pretty selfish. Like, it's yourself. It's all about how well you perform, what you can do moving forward. And now all of a sudden you have this little human being that you have to take care of. And I also have a husband that has the same career as a professional athlete. So we have to both work around each other's, and then take care of our child and then work around each other's schedules. So it's a balancing act on so many sides of things. And I think it's not just like, okay, it's my turn to go, you take time. I think it's really important that we prioritize time with our child. That's the most important thing right now. So things like training sometimes don't always happen. And we're trying to, now he's 1.5 years old. We're trying to get into the balance of things now that we have daycare and help like that. But everything's just a lot slower, a bit trickier. But it's okay. We're figuring it out slowly.
And I can imagine living in Sweden as well. That's an added layer of complexity for you.
Yeah, I mean, for me, my mother passed away a few years ago, and my father he's in a home for dementia. So I think the hardest thing is that we waited so long to have kids. We didn't have parents that were really capable. And then here in Sweden, Raina's mom helps as much as she can, but she's also getting up there in ages, and our child has got a lot of energy. So he's not the easiest. So in some senses, yeah, it's hard to be away from family, but at the same time, if you are going to have a family, Sweden is a pretty good place to be raising kids.
Yeah, I can imagine. And how did you approach that decision to, if this is too personal, like just let me know when it comes out. How did you approach the decision to, okay, I'm going to pause my career for X number of months or years and take this time out? Because like we're discussing before, like my wife and I are at this kind of conversational point, and so many of our friends are at that point where they are, it's not their full-time thing, but they live in BC, for example, and it's a huge part of their identity. Like, this is the type of person I am. Yeah, I've got a bunch of friends like that, and they're all kind of at this point. Like, it's a really tough decision to step away from that and to go for such an aggressive change, but you have got that kind of that time pressure too.
Yeah, I mean, it's tricky. We so in Sweden, you get support with IVF if you start the process before you turn 40. Mm-hmm. So we were 39, and we were both kind of like, well, we had kind of tried, but not seriously. And we thought, oh, maybe it just doesn't work. Maybe we should see if this is something that we actually need to do. So we started the process. But we only got as far as like signing up and receiving some test things in the mail. Because we also decided, all right, we'll like try seriously for a bit. And literally after 1 month, we were pregnant. And we're both kind of like, oh shit, okay, this happened. We thought it would be like after a year, we hadn't really gotten to the point, like we didn't know if we were going to need IVF, and we were on the fence as to whether or not we would actually go through with it if it came to that. I know it's been great I've seen a lot of my friends go through the process, and it's really hard. And we weren't sure if that was for us. Because we had been kind of on the fence, like, oh, I don't know, like we've got our dogs. That's great. But we were really fortunate, and it happened. And I don't know, I didn't really pause my career that much. It looked a little bit different. I skied up until one day past his due date. So I was kind of out there. It was, it was like a mellow season, I would say. But I was still going on team trips with up until January. He was born in March. Did like a photo shoot in the fall, 5 months pregnant, riding bikes and stuff. And I kind of kept going. And I think even 2 weeks after our son was born, we were out shooting photos for a sponsor because they had asked for some stuff, which it was tricky because in Sweden, you have like 2 years of parental leave that you have to share between both parents. The dad has to take at least 6 months. So everyone kind of assumed that I was on parental leave. But because we have these non-traditional jobs, we're like, I don't know, we can't walk away from our job and assume that it's going to be there in a year. So we never really took that. We never fully stopped. We had support from our sponsors and understanding. So it wasn't like they were piling things on our schedule like before. But it wasn't, we weren't just like, all right, we're done. We're having kids. We'll come back in a year. not sure if I can recommend that, to be honest, especially if you live in a country where you do have the luxury of having like being able to take a year off per parent. I'd say if you can do it, do it. It's pretty precious time. But you can kind of do a lot of the things you did before. It just is going to take a lot more time, and it's going to look a little more different. You're not going to get as many hours out there. But eventually when your kid gets a little bit older, if they're interested, you're going to have somebody else to share it with. So it's one of those, like, I'm not going to lie, it's not easy. And I feel like a lot of my friends that had kids, they kind of hid all that until I had kids. And then they're like, now they're going to dump all the shit on you. And I don't understand why, because they're like, I guess they want you to have kids. But I don't know. That's not my approach. It's really hard. You're not going to sleep. I don't know when I'm going to like fully have a full night's sleep. Even when I left, I just left for a couple of days for a film tour. And it was like, great, I'll catch up on sleep. Well, you don't get to bed till midnight and you wake up at clockwork at 6 at the latest. So it's like, I'm not catching up on sleep here. But it is worth it. It's totally worth it. It's just really, really hard.
Yeah, I can only imagine. And honestly, I've heard exactly the same thing from my friends that I've asked, everyone else I've asked who's been on the podcast in a not similar situation, but a similar situation. Yeah. Like, it's incredibly difficult by the sounds of it, but worthwhile. Probably like the best things are.
Exactly. It's like, I mean, if you like a challenge, yeah.
Right, need to go see my wife then. I like challenge.
If you like a challenge, you want to keep saying. I mean, but it's really cool at the same time. It's like it's fun to introduce other people to things that you love, and then now, like, we have the opportunity to introduce our son to all the things that we love. And that's pretty cool. Like, we have like a little like kids ride shotgun thing that we attach to our bike, and he loves it. He can barely touch the pegs. He's kind of on the borderline for actually fitting on it. But if he sees our bikes, he just starts pointing and crying until he gets on the bike. And like that warms our heart, definitely. So it's like, there's a lot of stuff that's really hard, but there's also a lot of stuff that's pretty amazing, and that is way more important than all the hard stuff.
I can absolutely imagine. The sponsorship piece is interesting. Like I said, I've worked in the kind of CrossFit high performance world, worked with a lot of Brazilian jiu-jitsu athletes and these kind of elite performers, and they're sponsored too. The experience from that world is sponsors can be incredibly fickle in terms of, and you can understand why from a business perspective. They're just looking at dollars in versus dollars out, and they've got to see an ROI. But there must be dealing with that pressure to get out, do things, and I'm completely unsure how your sponsors are. They may be very different, but they're still running businesses. And like, it must be difficult to deal with that scarcity of, oh, well, maybe it won't be there.
Yeah, I was terrified to tell my sponsors that I was pregnant, that this was happening. And I was also really surprised to hear. I mean, I don't know, actually not 100% surprised, because I think there's been a lot changing amongst support for female athletes becoming mothers. So especially in the US, I think it's like kind of taboo to just totally cut things. And that's thanks to other female athletes that have come before us that have really been paving the way. But that being said, it's still, I mean, I told them during the pandemic years, and some, outdoor companies were thriving, but then it was also starting to like get harder. So you never know. It's like, okay, this could be a excuse to kind of cut things down a bit. But fortunately, I had really great support from my sponsors. Picked up another sponsor while pregnant. Been, super fortunate. And I think that a lot of companies are kind of realizing that, I mean, it doesn't necessarily make sense to drop the 40-year-olds because last time I checked, we're in that age bracket where a lot of people, like, they're still active, they're still out there, they're still getting stuff done. And they've got the money
to spend on gear. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And they don't necessarily relate to the 20-year-olds. It's like, I'm in the sport and I see all the 20-year-olds and it's like, I'm like core in the sport. And it's like, it's such a different world to me. So if I'm 40 and I'm looking at buying gear, I'm not really going to look at the 20-year-olds. It's like, they're just doing something else. So I think a lot of companies, they also see like the benefit of keeping on some of these older athletes that have new lifestyles. And so for that, I've been pretty fortunate. We'll see how it goes moving forward.
Well, I suppose it's a different lens of aspiration because, like, on one hand, you're saying, like, look at the absolute peak performance of, like, this is what we can throw some 20-year-olds down and see how they come out. And it's like this insane creation that is just like, who knows what's going to happen next. And then you have the aspiration of, like, this is how you can still live an incredible life, be an incredible athlete whilst doing real life shit too. And that is a way more relevant aspirational level for most people, not in terms of what you're doing isn't incredible, but in terms of there's more of a connection between you and the receiver.
Yeah, I think so. And the more we kind of, because I think it's a bit different from, like, I look at other sports. Like, for example, if you look at Serena Williams, that is a amazing athlete, obviously, I think she's pregnant with her second kid or has had her second kid. I don't really recall, but she's got a kid and she's continued her career. Well, most people can't really relate to her situation because she has so much money and can afford like a private nanny that can follow her along the way. And that's something like I'm not in that level as far as a professional athlete goes. And so my level is maybe a little bit more realistic to what most people can try and figure out. I still have a lot of privileges and support, throughout from my sponsors and stuff, but I can't afford the nanny to follow me around. So we're trading off, like a lot of the families here where I live, like we'll see everyone at the bike park and parents will switch off. And that is our reality. We don't have someone following us around all the time. And I think people like to see that and maybe get a little motivation themselves to be like, okay, it can be done. You can still maintain a bit of your old self before you had kids, and still be a parent. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Cause I'm guessing you find that core part of you. It's like there's peripheral ideas of like, there's something in, so the way I'm seeing this as a kind of high performance coach is there's something within you that says yes to creativity and adventure and challenge and self-expression. And that initially was expressed through mogul skiing, but it wasn't quite in alignment with what's really meaningful to you, that central part of you. But there was something more so within that in the world of freeride. And it's like that creativity, the unknown a bit more. And then you have that creeping in with becoming a mother too. Like it's still on that adventurous path. There's like kind of personal development there, but there's also challenge, there's excitement, and there's giving to someone else too.
Yeah, definitely. I think for myself and like my friend Elise, who I've really been in this whole adventure together a lot with her and her son, I think for us it was a little bit like, oh, you can't do that. Well, watch me. I'm going to figure out how to make it happen. That being said, we've learned a lot of stuff that's like, yeah, you can do it. I don't advise it. I don't advise doing certain things. Like but what? There is like, don't like, if you can travel with your kids, it's great. It's awesome. Don't necessarily have to, depending on where you live. You can still do a lot of exciting things outdoors with your kids. for potentially a lot of us in our own backyards. If you are going to travel, I don't recommend crossing too many time zones, because a 1.5-year-old doesn't understand that it's 2:00 in the morning and it's not time to party. It's time to sleep. So I think, we kind of took everything to the extreme, which it's not necessary, and I don't think it's advisable. But if you just tone it, back it off like 50%, you can still get out and have a pretty exciting. You can probably do more because you're not sitting on a plane traveling from destination to destination. You can probably actually do a lot more. And I think, that would be my biggest.
When
advice.
did you decide to turn this journey into a movie?
Elise and I have been talking for years about wanting to do something together. And she actually, I heard the story because I was like full on, I don't know if you ever heard the term like mom brain, but I had mom brain for the majority of this journey.
So what's that, like heavy brain fog, like kind of?
Yeah, like because your brain actually like change, like when you become a mom, like your brain actually changes to be able to like take care of your child, it adapts to your child. I don't know the exact like scientific definition of what happens, but it's a real thing. It's not just a saying for lack of sleep or anything like that. But I was definitely on this like in this fog throughout the entire process. And I know Elise kind of came up with the original idea of us coming together and doing something. And it just kind of like worked out perfectly that I think she was further along in her pregnancy than I was. No, wait. Sorry. Trying to figure out the whole timeline. We didn't start this until after. Okay. She had already had a kid. And I was not far behind her. And we kind of, started this whole journey and came up with the idea and everything. I was just so sleep deprived, but it's amazing that we made it happen. Now that I think about it, you would have to ask her exactly. She told me the story like 2 days ago because somebody was asking, and it's already
got you.
Yeah.
What did you want to showcase? Like, what was the objective for you personally?
I think we wanted to show that like we're still relevant as athletes, like even though we've become moms and we're also older mothers, we're both in our 40s, that we're still relevant athletes. We still like our experience still can kind of outweigh what a lot of the younger athletes have, especially in the type of skiing that we do. And then also show that, okay, we can kind of bring our kids along for the experience. But we also wanted to make it fun. We kind of wanted to, we poked fun a little bit at the industry and how it's been in the past. And we, made fun of the shit show that is parenting, especially when you're trying to be on the road all the time. We wanted to inspire, but also just make people laugh, because there's just been so much, there's so much that's happened in the world in the past years, the pandemic and wars and stuff like that. And we just wanted to have a good laugh as well.
Nice. And where can people watch it? Like, talk to me about availability, all that kind of stuff.
So we're currently finalizing those details, but I'm quite certain it's going to be available online towards the end of November. But I'll have to follow up with you for for the exact, like the location and timing.
If there's anything in between, like our recording and release date, I'll put it in the show notes so people can see it within there, or I might even edit over the top. But yeah, we'll link to it as soon as we find it. And what I think a nice place to kind of wrap this up and move towards closing is, you spoke initially about the example that your father set you and what you learned from him. What's the example that you hope to set for your son?
That's a good question. I think probably the biggest thing I want to set for him is, like, if you have a dream, go out there and chase it, because that's the only way it might become a reality. And it doesn't matter how big it is, but if you're willing to put in the work, it can come true. And I think for us, we've already talked about this as parents. Like, of course, it'd be amazing if he's a skier and into sports, but we don't know if that's the reality when he gets older. And we just want to be here to support whatever his dreams and passions, wherever they may lead him. And we'll be here to help, give him any of the tools that he might need to get there. But he's got to put in a lot of the hard work himself if he wants to make something happen like that.
Nice. And where can people follow you, follow your journey, and keep up to date with all things Jackie Paaso?
So you can mostly follow me on Instagram, Jackie Paaso. That's where most stuff happens. I'm too old for TikTok.
Yep, me too. Me too.
Yeah.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.
Join us on a powerful journey with Once We Were Warriors, a documentary that transcends boundaries and speaks to the souls of our veterans. We need your support to turn this vision into reality. Once We Were Warriors reveals the path to recovery for injured Royal Marines commandos in the French Alps. Produced by former servicemen, it offers the most authentic storytelling. This documentary dives deep into the lives of those who have served, challenging stereotypes and advocating for veterans' care as we approach a decade since the end of combat operations in Afghanistan. But to make this vision a reality, we need your support and your funding. Support us on a crowdfunding campaign at www.oncewewerewarriorsfilm.com to help us make this documentary a reality and give a voice to those who have sacrificed so much. Join us in making a difference. Together, we can rewrite the narrative for our veterans. Once more, that link is www.oncewewewarriorsfilm.com.